Okay, so you want to own a movie theater. A big, dark room, a giant screen, a crowd of people who paid money just to sit still and stare at a wall for 2 hours. No haggling, no negotiating, no convincing anyone of anything. They already want to be there. You just have to open the doors. That's the picture in your head. Popcorn smell, ticket stubs, opening night lines wrapped around the building. Here's what that picture leaves out. The distributor who takes 90 cents of every dollar your ticket brings in during week 1. The projector bulb that costs more than a used car. The 7-figure renovation you'll be forced into just to keep pace with the theater across town. And the fact that the entire business, from top to bottom, is quietly designed around selling you something other than the movie. Movie theaters are one of the strangest businesses in America because almost nobody outside the industry understands where the money actually comes from. You think you're in the film business. You're not. You're in the concession business, and the film is the thing that gets people to walk through the door. Let's start with what it costs to get into this in the first place, because the sticker price is a lot bigger than a screen and some seats. A single modern multiplex auditorium, the kind with stadium seating, a proper sound system, and a screen large enough to matter, can cost anywhere from $500,000 to $1.5 million to build out per screen. A serious multiplex needs somewhere between 8 and 16 screens to be competitive in most markets. Multiply that out and you're looking at $5 million to well over $15 million just for construction and equipment before you've bought a single case of popcorn kernels. And that's before the land. A theater needs a large footprint, usually attached to or near a shopping center, with enough parking to handle a Friday night rush. Which means you're either leasing a huge retail pad or buying one outright, and either option runs into real money fast in any market with decent foot traffic. Then there's the equipment itself, and this is where people underestimate the business the most. A digital cinema projector capable of handling a modern release costs $60,000 to $150,000 per screen, and that's before the server that decrypts and plays the film, which studios require for security reasons and which adds another $20,000 to $30,000 per screen on top of that. Sound systems capable of filling a 300-seat auditorium without distortion run $30,000 to $80,000 per room. Add reclining seats, which have become close to mandatory in the last decade because customers now expect them, and you're paying $600 to $1,200 per seat installed. A single auditorium with 150 reclining seats can cost $150,000 just in seating. So add it all up: land or lease, construction, projection, sound, seating, concession equipment, HVAC sized for a building full of people sitting in the dark for hours at a time. A modest 12-screen multiplex can require $8 million to $20 million to open the doors. That's before marketing, before staffing, before you've sold a single ticket. Now here's the part that should worry you before we even get to operating costs. The equipment you just paid for starts losing relevance immediately. Projectors need bulbs that cost $2,000 to $5,000 each and burn out after roughly 1,000 hours of use. Every few years, the format arms race resets. 3D came and mostly went. Premium large format screens became table stakes. Laser projection is now replacing xenon bulb projection across the industry because it produces a brighter, more consistent image. And if your competitor down the road upgrades first, you're stuck matching them or watching your audience walk. Now let's talk about the part that actually explains this entire business, because it's the single most counterintuitive fact in the whole industry. You would assume that ticket sales are where a movie theater makes its money. They are not. For the first week or two of a major release, most of your ticket revenue doesn't belong to you at all. Here's how it actually works. When a theater shows a new release, it signs an agreement with the film's distributor, usually a major studio, that dictates what percentage of ticket revenue the theater gets to keep. For a big opening weekend, that split can start as low as 10 to 20% in favor of the theater. meaning the studio takes 80 to 90% of what you collect at the box office in the first week alone. As the weeks go on and the film's audience naturally shrinks, the split gradually shifts back in the theater's favor, sometimes reaching 50-50 or better by the fourth or fifth week. But by then, the crowds have thinned out anyway. Read that again. On the single busiest weekend of a film's entire run, the weekend with the longest lines and the fullest parking lot, you are keeping somewhere around a dime to 20 cents of every ticket dollar. The theater that looks the most successful from the outside, the one with the sold-out shows and the excited crowd, is often making the least money per ticket of the entire release. So if ticket sales barely cover the lights, how does anyone make money running a movie theater? The concession stand? That's the whole business. Popcorn, soda, and candy are sold at a markup that would be unthinkable in almost any other retail category. And unlike the box office, the theater keeps nearly all of it. A large popcorn that costs the theater somewhere around 50 cents to $1 in raw ingredients and labor can sell for $8 to $10. A soft drink that costs pennies in syrup and carbonation sells for $6 or $7. Industry estimates consistently put concession gross margins somewhere north of 85%, which makes it one of the most profitable retail categories that exists anywhere, in any industry. This is why theater staff are trained, sometimes aggressively, to upsell you at the counter. It's why combo deals are priced to look like a discount while actually pushing you toward the large size. It's why the concession stand is positioned directly in your path between the ticket counter and the auditorium doors, so that walking past it without buying anything requires a small act of willpower. None of that is an accident. The movie is the bait. The popcorn is the business. This single fact reshapes every other decision a theater owner makes. It explains why theaters are desperate for you to arrive early instead of right at showtime, because more time in the lobby means more time near the concession counter. It explains why theaters have pushed so hard into recliner seating and premium formats that carry higher ticket prices, while also justifying higher concession prices to match the elevated experience. And it explains why the industry has quietly moved toward alcohol sales in many markets, adding bars and in-seat service. Because a $12 cocktail carries a margin that makes soda look like a rounding error. Now, operating costs? Because a movie theater does not run itself. Staffing a multiplex requires ticket sellers, ushers, concession staff, projectionists or technicians, and management. Because theaters are open long hours 7 days a week, you're running multiple shifts across a building that never really closes for long. Labor for a mid-size multiplex commonly runs $600,000 to $1.5 million a year, depending on the market and local wage laws. Utilities are enormous because you're climate controlling a dozen or more large, dark, enclosed rooms for hours at a stretch every single day, regardless of how many people are actually inside them. A multiplex can easily run $200,000 to $500,000 a year in electricity and HVAC alone. Film rental fees, the studio's cut we already discussed, aren't the only costs tied to each release. Marketing co-op fees, digital delivery costs for each film print, and required technology maintenance contracts on the projection and sound systems all add up, often totaling tens of thousands of dollars a year per screen, just in overhead tied directly to showing content at all. Add property taxes, insurance, which has climbed sharply across commercial real estate in recent years, and routine maintenance on seating, carpeting, and equipment that gets heavy daily use. The fixed cost of simply keeping a multiplex open can run $2 million to $4 million a year before a single ticket is sold. Here's the structural problem sitting underneath all of this, and it's the one that separates theater owners who survive from the ones who don't. Your biggest expenses are fixed: rent, staffing, utilities, insurance. All of it arrives whether the theater is packed or empty. But your revenue is wildly uneven. tied entirely to a release calendar you don't control. A single blockbuster weekend can generate more revenue than the 2 slow weeks on either side of it combined. The industry lives and dies by the strength of the studio release slate, and when that slate goes quiet, so does your cash flow, regardless of how well you're running the building. This is exactly what happened, at almost unbelievable scale, to the largest theater chains in the world. Cineworld, the parent company of Regal Cinemas, and the second largest theater chain on the planet, had been carrying billions of dollars in debt from an aggressive, decades-long expansion strategy, buying up chains across multiple countries to become one of the biggest exhibitors in the world. That debt load was manageable as long as the release calendar kept theaters full and cash flowing in reliably. When theaters were forced to close for extended periods, and studios delayed major releases rather than open into empty houses, the fixed costs never stopped arriving while the revenue that was supposed to service that enormous debt simply disappeared. Cineworld filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in 2022. AMC, the largest chain in the country, avoided the same fate, but only by taking on additional debt and repeatedly raising capital through stock sales just to keep its balance sheet from collapsing under obligations that didn't pause just because the auditoriums were sitting empty. The lesson underneath both stories is structural, not cyclical. These companies didn't fail because people stopped wanting to watch movies. They failed because their fixed costs, rent, debt payments, staffing across hundreds of locations were sized for a steady, predictable release calendar. And the moment that calendar broke, even briefly, the math connecting costs to revenue broke with it. A theater chain with sold-out opening weekends and packed parking lots the month before can still be one disrupted release schedule away from insolvency. Full houses tell you nothing about whether the underlying financial structure can hold. And there's a second, slower threat running alongside that one. Streaming has changed how quickly a film's exclusive theatrical window closes. For most of film history, a movie played only in theaters for months before it became available anywhere else, which gave theater owners a long runway to sell tickets to an audience with no other legal option. That window has compressed dramatically. Many films now move to streaming platforms within weeks of their theatrical debut, sometimes even releasing simultaneously in both. Every day shaved off that exclusive window is a day of potential ticket revenue that simply doesn't happen, because the customer who might have gone Tuesday night instead waits 11 days and watches it on their couch for the price of a subscription they already pay for. This is why theaters have leaned so hard into things a living room genuinely cannot replicate. Premium large format screens, laser projection with a level of brightness and clarity home televisions can't match, immersive sound systems, recliner seating, and increasingly alcohol service and in-theater dining that turn a 2-hour movie into a full evening out. The theaters that are thriving aren't competing with streaming on convenience because they cannot win that fight. They're competing on an experience a screen at home cannot provide and charging a premium ticket price to match it. So how does a movie theater actually make money in plain mechanical terms? The core engine looks something like this. Box office revenue in the early weeks of a release mostly flows to the studio, so it barely covers your fixed costs during a film's biggest weeks. Concessions, where you keep the overwhelming majority of every dollar, are where your actual profit lives. And the split between those two changes constantly depending on what's playing and how many weeks it's been in your building. Let's run a realistic scenario for a 12-screen multiplex. Say the theater sells 15,000 tickets in an average month at an average price of $12, generating $180,000 in box office revenue. During opening weeks on major titles, the theater might only keep 30 to 40% of that after film rental fees, netting somewhere around $60,000 to $70,000 from ticket sales in a typical month once averaged across new releases and older holdovers. But that same 15,000 moviegoers, if roughly half of them buy concessions averaging $15 per person, generates another $110,000 to $115,000, almost all of which stays with the theater after the low cost of goods sold, Combined net revenue lands somewhere around $175,000 to $185,000 for the month. Against fixed monthly costs of $170,000 to $220,000 for a building this size, that theater is hovering right around break-even in an average month, and genuinely profitable only during the strongest release windows, holiday seasons, and summer blockbuster stretches. That's the honest math of the business in a good year. In a bad year, the calculation gets uglier fast. A weak release slate, a couple of major delayed titles, a nearby competitor opening with newer premium screens and recliners that pull your regulars away, or a spike in insurance and utility costs. And that same theater can slide from a thin profit into a real monthly loss without a single dramatic event happening. No fire, no scandal, just a quieter lobby on a Friday night, a slightly lower concession attach rate, and a fixed cost base that doesn't care either way. There is a real path to strong profitability in this business, but it almost never comes from ticket sales alone. It comes from theaters that treat the concession stand as the actual product, that invest in premium formats and recliner seating to justify a higher ticket price the studio split doesn't fully erase. That add alcohol and dine-in service to extend the average customer's spend well past the price of admission, and that manage their fixed costs tightly enough to survive the inevitable slow months between blockbusters without the debt load that sank chains like Cineworld. The theaters that thrive aren't the ones with the most screens or the most impressive lobby. They're the ones that understood early that the movie was never really the business. The movie is what gets a person to walk through the door, sit down in the dark, and reach for their wallet on the way in.